What it is, people, my name is Batman, and I am cautiously, and I emphasize cautiously because I have been let down so often in the past, I am cautiously optimistic that the next Call of Duty will be enjoyable, or at the very least not a complete letdown. And, you know, people have been asking me if I'm going to buy the next Call of Duty. You know, obviously I've talked a lot of shit about Ghosts. Ghosts did not make me very happy. I was very perturbed by the appalling manner in which IW conducted themselves from pre-launch till this very day, and for the rest of time, because I hate fucking little bastard twats like them for life. But my disappointment with Ghosts was, I think, exacerbated greatly by the amplified pain of being let down so abruptly after my faith in the series had just begun to make a comeback. Because it's important to know, I was a fan of Black Ops 2. If it wasn't for the never-ending, god-awful, game-breaking lag, it would have been my least hated Call of Duty, but MW2 still holds that title because MW2 was the last COD without lag. And it's kind of mysterious how the lag didn't get better with dedicated servers on Ghost this year, but that's something I'm going to get into with a whole nother video later on. Following Black Ops 2, I was optimistic about the direction of the series because I felt like the developers were really finally listening and implementing all of the stuff that the community had been asking for since MW2. For instance, there were no death streaks or second chance, stupid motherfuckers falling on their ass, killing you from a prone position, getting back up later, walking it off. They had a legit score streak system where you got points towards your streak for everything you did, and it was a game designed for rushing and rushers in general. It did not provide many advantages to defensive play styles, and not that I don't think defensive play has its place, because it does, but I personally find more enjoyment out of faster paced matches, and I think a lot of people feel the same way I do, and that's a big reason that Ghosts flopped so miserably this year, is because it promoted much slower defensive emphasized gameplay than before, enough so that a huge section of the COD fanbase went back to Black Ops 2. And you know, you might have heard some rumors that there's actually more people on Black Ops 2. May or may not be true. I think people are forgetting to account for the fact that the player count is split in half on Ghost by the new gen consoles, but it is safe to say that the amount of players who return to Black Ops 2 is substantial. Substantial because they started releasing new camos and personalization packs for Black Ops 2, right? Which I think is very unusual and signals that they feel there is a crop that needs to be tended to, so to speak, on that game. And another sign that people prefer Black Ops 2 and its very fast-paced style matches is that Ghost is shifting in that direction, right? They switched back to a score streak system recently. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but you get points towards your skill streaks for capping flags and things like that now. So because it was so recently that I did feel the game was headed in the right direction with Black Ops 2, I'm not ready just yet to abandon the series entirely. Now, I know there are plenty of you out there who are ready to abandon it entirely, and I don't blame you. I understand, and I especially understand if you're someone who didn't like Black Ops 2 either. And I know there's a sizable chunk of players out there who thought Black Ops 2 was the worst COD ever. In my experience, the Call of Duty community has generally been pretty divided over which Call of Duties were good and which Call of Duties were bad, and certainly which Call of Duty was the worst. Until now, I think there's a general consensus forming that Ghosts is the worst. But, you know, if you go back, you're going to find different amounts of people that love or hate certain Call of Duties. And I've also found that these games are kind of like presidents. Like, their reputations pick up after their term has come to an end. Like, you browse around comment sections today, plenty of motherfuckers is talking about how MW2 and Black Ops 1 were their favorite Call of Duty games, but it's like nobody was saying anything nice about either of those games while they were out. I even saw someone with the fucking tenacity to say that Black Ops 1 had gun balance. Like, no, it did not have gun. Everyone and their fucking mother agreed that the FAMAS was OP and it didn't get nerfed till 2 months before MW3 came out. Everyone agreed gun balance was broken in Black Ops 1, but over time, everybody just remembers the positives and forgets the bullshit, and I think that's the case with MW2 as well. Now, looking forward to the next Call of Duty Ghosts, I know a lot of people are already searching things like, will Call of Duty Advanced Warfare be bad? I know this because I can check the search terms people have used to find one of my videos, and for some reason one of the Ghost videos I did talking shit about Ghosts pops up when they search that term, or at least it has so far. I'm sure it will get weaseled out of the search sooner or later, but until then, the other search term that ends up on that same video as well is why Advanced Warfare is bad, or even why Advanced Warfare is shit. I kid you not, it says the word shit right there in my Google Analytics, and you know what else that means is that Google has programmed shit to be a synonym with bad, so that's kind of funny. And so those are the kids that just want to see COD burn because it has burned them so, and I get that because I've been there in the past. And so I do understand people's skepticism in general, because most of us have faced an extreme level of disillusionment with Ghosts, and I think there's also been huge chunks of the Call of Duty fan base consecutively turned off to the series with each new game. You know, there are plenty of former COD players that have given up on various CODs in the past, and now that group is collectively starting to add up. And I also think that everyone in general is just pessimistic about Call of Duty following through on its hype. I think COD fans have really gotten their hopes way up and then ultimately let down when the game finally came out, enough times to the point that most of them are consciously resistant to the hype. Call of Duty has been extremely effective at hype, but not so much with follow-through. They can make a really neat trailer, but at the end of the day, it's lights and flashes, gimmicks. And not just the gimmicks, but the straight-up lies, too, right? Like when Robert Bowling said there would be no second chance in MW3, but there was. It was just called Final Stand. And, you know, as I've talked about a lot on this channel before, you all remember when Mark Rubin tweeted that Ghost wouldn't have quickscoping. Obviously it does, and dedicated servers on the pre-gen consoles don't seem to work very well, all that bullshit. And as more and more people feel duped and thus refuse to buy the hype, the strategy, the franchise itself is gonna fall apart, because it's a fucking house of cards. So much so that there are plenty of people, myself included at times in the past, that want to see the franchise fail out of pure spite. And all it takes is, you know, one card to go down and they all come tumbling with it, and I think we're starting to see the signs of collapse here. I certainly think Activision has noticed the hit on the head, because sales are down a couple million this year, and they were down a couple million last year for Black Ops 2 as well. This time around, Call of Duty is going to have to rely on a concrete showing of merit and quality in-game, because the bullshit is not going to fly anymore. If they haven't figured that out, they're fucktards and they're doomed. But the thing is, I think they have figured it out. Based on the signs we've seen so far, I am cautiously optimistic, again with heavy emphasis on cautiously, that the next Call of Duty might live up to the hype for once. Be a positive step in the right direction, or at the very least not a complete letdown. And I didn't feel this way about Ghosts. It's important you understand I have not ridden the COD hype train in a while. I was somewhat hyped early on, mainly because, like I said, they can make a good trailer, but it's really just lights and flashes, you know. I remember in the trailer they talked about destructible environments and shit, and they showed the gas station tumbling over on Octane, and that was exciting. But as more gameplay came out and after COD XP, it was pretty clear that the gas station was as cool as it got as far as dynamic environments go. And after watching all the gameplay, I knew it wasn't going to be anything special. And those of you that were around back then will remember I said as much. I understood that because this game would see a majority of its sales on the old generation of consoles, because it did come out before the new gen, that it was going to have to be designed with the old gen in mind, which really meant that they couldn't add that much more stuff in. They could only reskin stuff that had already been there in the game, just like they've been doing, because Call of Duty has really been capped on the pre-gen, mainly because they wanted to keep the game running at 60 frames per second, but for that to work, they really can't put much more shit into the game. You know, case in point, Titanfall, which worked really hard to get 60 frames per second, even on the 360 as well, it failed at that and is capped at like 45 frames per second on the pre-gen, because they put too much stuff in the game. Because the thing is, even though most of us might not even realize this, the vast majority of players, and us included, you listening to this right now are included in this group, we all value 60 frames per second over anything else. We care more about 60 frames per second than we do story or gameplay or depth. 60 frames per second is the most important feature to a game that nobody even knows they care about so much, and that's why Call of Duty has been so dominant for so long, even though it never changes anything or does anything new, because nobody else could reach 60 frames per second. So I was not super excited for Ghost, because I knew at best it was just going to be the same shit, but what I did not anticipate was that it would suck balls. Because like I said, after Black Ops 2, I was optimistic that at the least, developers had finally chosen the fast-paced, rush-emphasis formula that I prefer, and you know, then Ghosts just took it in the complete opposite direction of everything that Black Ops 2 did right, and so Ghosts was a major disappointment. disappointment in that regard. But all of these things I just talked about are also what drives my optimism for Advanced Warfare. For starters, it's kind of like how the night is darkest just before the dawn. Call of Duty Ghosts is an abhorrent mistake that Activision would be loath to repeat. And it's pretty clear that they know it's a fuck up because we've seen them go to such great lengths to sell the game. You remember I was talking about this a couple of videos ago. The game was on sale for 20 bucks at Walmart. They are already doing Gold Edition bundle deals where you get the first DLC free. I think the amount of changes they've made to this game post-release, especially big stuff again like switching back to the point streak system, signify a clear admission of failure. And of course also we know that Ghost sold roughly 4 million less than its predecessor, which says a lot. So Ghosts sucks, but so long as the publisher and or developers are aware that Ghosts sucks, they'll do their best to move away from the suck. And just in case they haven't figured it out yet, let's all continue to bitch about Ghosts sucking as much as possible. I made like 10 videos about it. I did my part, motherfuckers. Got the word out, knocking on the door, son. Word to your mother, this game fucking blows just like her. Isn't that weird to think your mom sucked your dad's cock? But I digress. So, with understanding that Ghosts has already taken steps to fix its game design flaws, again, most notably with ditching the kill streak system and things like that, I think it's reasonable to expect that Advanced Warfare won't launch with those same flaws, unless Sledgehammer Games consists of a bunch of fucktards trying to hump a doorknob. Now, in conjunction with this, what's important to keep in mind is that this is the first Call of Duty designed for the new gen. Now, I know Infinity Ward tried to advertise Ghosts as a next-gen title with a new engine and shit, and that was sort of a messaging error if you ask me, because all it did was further cripple the already shaky trust this community has in its developers, because I think it was pretty clear that even playing on the new gen, there was nothing at all new or groundbreaking about it. And I almost feel like that made people's disappointment that much more potent, because motherfuckers was expecting new gen and instead they got Ghosts. So, you know, they should have been more straight up and just been like, we can't design a game for a generation of consoles that won't even be out when the game releases. But you know, they had to pretend that Call of Duty was God's gift to gamers, and even the most ludicrous of expectations would be met, but ultimately it wasn't. And really, I think the reason Call of Duty has had to rely so heavily on straight up lies in the past, such as no quickscoping or dedicated servers on the pre-gen or dynamic environments on a new engine, is because they knew they couldn't rely on the actual merit of the game itself because they were so capped. But if they can actually utilize the new gen tech with this new Call of Duty, they won't be capped any longer and should, in theory, be able to pioneer new grounds for Call of Duty and thus not have to rely on lies and actually market off the merit of the game itself. Because at the end of the day, Call of Duty Ghosts just wasn't a new gen title. And again, how could it be when it came out before the new gen came out? You know, one of Activision's talking points right after release was how badass they were for shipping $1 billion worth of merchandise on day one. Now granted, some of that is, you know, the fucking legendary editions and shit or whatever, but $1 billion worth of $60 games means they sold like at least roughly 15 million copies before the new gen consoles had even come out. And considering the game sales did not, at least as far as we know at this point, even break 20 million total sales, that means the vast majority of players would be and are playing Ghosts on the pre-gen. If they had designed that game for the new gen with a bunch of new gen features that 90% of the people who bought the game couldn't even access, that would simply be a waste of time and money on their part, and it would probably piss off the players who feel punished and understandably frustrated that they are getting screwed because they didn't buy an expensive new piece of hardware that only had 3 games out at the time. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is that when so many players are already playing on the pre-gen, it's going to be enough cause even for players who would otherwise get the game on the new gen to stay on the pre-gen just so they can play with their friends. It's a snowball effect. And so Ghosts was always doomed to be a letdown, and I came into this game with open eyes about that fact, yet I was still blindsided by the suck. But this time around, the market context is very different. At this point, the new gen consoles have sold collectively, I believe, about 15 million units. Now, they've been around for 6 months, and it's another 6 months till the next COD comes out, so I would imagine they would be at least somewhere between, you know, 20 to 25 million units sold by then, assuming sales hold steady, and I'm sure there will be a spike in their sales in the fall, right as all these new games are coming out, especially because there will be all the different kinds of bundle deals, right, like the COD themed Xbox or PS4 or whatever. And again, it's a snowball effect. As more and more players are on the new gen, it's going to subtly yet consistently encourage their friends to get on the new gen bandwagon as well. And so Advanced Warfare most likely will see a majority of its sales on the new gen consoles, which means it can actually take advantage of the new gen consoles, which is a big deal because, like I was just talking about, it's very obvious that Call of Duty has been capped in terms of its graphical and gameplay capabilities since MW2. That's why we haven't seen any new dramatic changes since then, because they couldn't fit any more shit into the game at 60 frames per second without overloading the processors on the 360 and the PS3. And to be fair, Call of Duty has tried to bring in, you know, environmental dynamics. People say Advanced Warfare is copying Titanfall with the zipline, but the fact of the matter is COD had the zipline first. Remember Kowloon on Black Ops 1? But there's only so much they can do without hurting the frame rate. I'm surprised they were able to get the rocket to take off on launch in Black Ops 1, because, you know, you look at something like the skyscraper on Siege of Shanghai from Battlefield 4. That was their big Levolution selling point, and it is pretty awesome, but on the old gen, even at 30 frames per second, it barely works. When the skyscraper crashes on the old gen, your frame rate crashes with it, probably to single digits. And even on Titanfall, on the Xbox One, you have serious frame rate drops if you have like too many Titans blowing up at the same time, for instance. So to maintain that 60 frames per second, you can't put much else in. But that can change on the new gen, right? Because Battlefield is able to run all its Levolution and 64-player matches with vehicles running through the fucking air in HD 1080p at 60 frames per second on the new gen. And I'm very curious to see what Call of Duty can do with that kind of power. Because up to this point, it's been literally impossible for the game to progress or improve or build upon its foundations while retaining that 60 frames per second that we all value more than anything else, whether we acknowledge that fact or not. But with Advanced Warfare, for the first time since MW2, it is really truly possible. And they have signaled that they are intent on capitalizing and emphasizing this point as well. Sledgehammer has already come out and made a point of telling the fanbase that this game was designed with, and I quote, the next gen in mind. End quote. And that's not the only unique circumstance that gives me some hope for this new game. This is also the first Call of Duty in the history of the franchise to boast a 2-year development period, which should help a lot, because I think another big part of the problem in regards to Call of Duty copy and pasting every year is that they don't have time to change. You know, in the typical order of development stages for a game, you have a concept phase, a coding phase, and then a testing phase. So first they have to basically figure out exactly what they want to do with the game, because the coding process usually takes a lot of time and energy, and you certainly don't want to put a bunch of effort into coding something only to decide to scrap it later on and have that effort wasted away in vain. And you also can't throw much stuff in or make new decisions towards the end of development cycle closer to release, because unless it's something very small, you're not going to have enough time to write the code, and because you have to get everything done with enough time left over to test it all, right? And so if you start putting stuff in later on, you might not have enough time to test it either. That's what's fucked up Battlefield this year, was they had too much code to write and not enough time to test that code. And then the repairs took forever, because writing the code, even just to fix bugs, takes a long time, especially with something as complex as a video game. So when Call of Duty only has a year to work on something, they have to somehow come up with new ideas and ways to improve the game, basically simultaneously as they work on the DLC for the COD they just released. Like, I would bet as they were working on MW3 DLC, they already had a group spitballing ideas for their next game. And then after the studio finished the 4th DLC pack, those discussions get more serious, and then by the time Black Ops 2 actually launched, they will have already started coding stuff for Ghosts. Now, COD has had a real advantage just in the sheer amount of code that it can copy and paste from the previous game. For one, this cuts down on the coding time, obviously, but it also means less game testing is necessary because the bugs will have been worked out in a previous game already. You veterans may have noticed that COD launches have gotten progressively less buggy. You know, MW2 was buggy when it launched. I'm sure we all remember the infamous care package glitch, among others, and I think that's because MW2 was the last COD to really bring in a bunch of new stuff to the table. When Black Ops 1 launched, it had some minor matchmaking issues, but nowadays, other than the horrendous game-breaking lag and or netcode, COD doesn't even have many noticeable bugs or glitches, which I don't give credit to the developers for necessarily, because it's easy when you've already made the same game 10 times in a row, right? But that's what I mean when I say they don't have enough time to do anything new, because if they did try to change the game in genuine noticeable ways, they wouldn't be able to copy and paste that code. It would take more time to code and more time to test, and it might also mean dramatically changing huge pieces of other code throughout the game, depending on how that new mechanism, whatever it may be, interacted with the game around it. Because, you know, even if you put in something very small that was brand new, like say the ability to climb on walls, which is something they've been sort of implying, I believe, with Advanced Warfare, it would mean an exponentially higher risk of bugs of some sort, because what happens when the player tries to wall climb this curved object? What happens if he wall climbs a moving object like the trolley on Bayview? What happens if multiple people are trying to wall climb something? How do you stop people from wall climbing out of the map? All this shit has the potential to cause headaches for the development team, because code always has to be very specific and account for every possible scenario or situation, like how in both of the last two Battlefield games, when you go out of the combat area and you hit start, your screen gets stuck in that hazy, gray, fuzzy tint color for the rest of the match. And so something as minor as changing the color of the screen when you walk out of bounds ended up being a pretty frustrating bug that would ruin entire matches for some people, just because they forgot to tell the game what to do in that very specific situation where someone hits start out of bounds. And so the bigger the new thing is that you implement, the more bugs you're going to get and the more serious those bugs will be. So in the past, Call of Duty simply hasn't had the time to allow them to risk missing their release date deadline or releasing an unfinished game because they tried to put in something super new. And what I'm saying is, Advanced Warfare is the first Call of Duty that shouldn't have that problem. They actually had the time to do something new. And I know because Ghost sucks so bad and because the series really has not wowed us in a very long time, it's easy to perceive it as a lost cause. I understand if you've given up hope, and it may be that it is in a permanent state of decline and there is no saving it, but it's important to remember that Call of Duty has come back from disappointment before. Following the unprecedented success of COD 4, most players and critics widely viewed World at War as a letdown, and indeed they saw sales for World at War drop by about 4 million that year, which was a much heavier blow back then because they hadn't even reached roughly 10 million of the 20 million players they have today. So with all of these things in mind, I have not given up hope. However, that being said, I am a skeptic. Advanced Warfare really has to come through this year. They're on the new gen, they had plenty of development time. If Advanced Warfare is a lackluster experience, there are no excuses this time around, period. You fuck it up this time around, and really that will be the end, I think, for me and most people involved. And also, the lag needs to be dealt with properly. I'm going to make another video dedicated specifically to this topic, but the lag is simply unacceptable, and it still hasn't gone away, even on dedicated servers on the new gen, so it really raises some eyebrows and cholesterol levels, which is bad for the cock. But bash that like button with your purple-headed warrior, aka ankle spanker, aka the cock. This is Batman, signing out.
Hey Tommy, come look at this guy on my screen.
I'm coming. Aww. What was it?
It was just this dead guy who had his arm like propped up on the fucking toilet. It was pretty fucking funny.